The hum of the tires on the winding mountain road was the only sound for miles, a low drone that usually lulled me into a comfortable focus. Tonight, though, it felt different. The darkness outside my headlights was absolute, swallowing the familiar shapes of the landscape. I was hours into the drive, heading back from a conference, and the late hour was starting to wear on me. A sign announcing Rosie's Diner next exit was a welcome sight. Coffee and maybe a slice of pie sounded like exactly what I needed to shake off this creeping unease. Rosie's was a classic roadside stop, the kind with flickering neon signs and a parking lot mostly empty at this hour. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon and strong coffee. A lone waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, greeted me with a warm smile. I settled onto a red vinyl stool at the counter, ordered a burger and coffee, and tried to relax. Brenda was friendly, the kind of person who made you feel at home even in the middle of nowhere. As she poured my coffee, she casually mentioned, "You be careful out on these roads tonight, hon." I raised an eyebrow. "Anything I should know about?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Heard some unsettling things lately. Couple of folks passing through said they were stopped by hitchhikers. Ended up getting robbed. Sheriff's Department is looking into it, but you know how it is out here." A knot tightened in my stomach. Robbed? Out here, alone? The thought sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Anyone get hurt?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Brenda hesitated. "Not that I heard, but you never know. Just keep your doors locked and don't pick anyone up." I thanked her for the warning, the image of empty wallets and worse flashing through my mind. I finished my meal quickly, the earlier fatigue replaced by a prickle of alertness. As I paid Brenda, her parting words echoed in my ears. "Safe travels, hon, and remember what I said." Back on the road, the darkness felt even more oppressive. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. I kept my eyes glued to the road, scanning the edges for any sign of movement. Then I saw him. A figure standing on the shoulder, thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. My foot instinctively eased off the gas, a flicker of the ingrained helpfulness that usually guided me, but Brenda's warning slammed into my thoughts. Robberies. Hitchhikers. Alone. The figure was tall and thin, his face obscured by a hood. Something about him, his absolute stillness, the way he seemed to be waiting just for me, sent a ripple of unease through my gut. I hesitated for a split second, then pressed down on the accelerator, the decision feeling both practical and a little cold. He disappeared in my rearview mirror. A few miles passed, the tension in my shoulders slowly starting to ease. Maybe Brenda was just being cautious. Maybe it was just someone down on their luck. Then the impossible happened. There he was again, the same figure standing on the side of the road, maybe a quarter mile ahead. My breath caught in my throat. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. That wasn't possible. I hadn't seen another car pass, no driveways, no turnoffs. I glanced at the clock, irrationally hoping time itself would offer an explanation, but it didn't. It was him. That's when I noticed the fuel gauge. Hovering dangerously close to empty, my stomach twisted. How had I not seen it drop so low? The next gas station, according to my GPS, was 30 miles away. A cold dread settled in. Stranded out here with that guy. Just then, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They seemed to be keeping a steady distance, matching my speed. I glanced back again. Just one set of headlights. Probably just another traveler, I told myself, trying to sound convincing even in my own head. But the image of the hitchhiker appearing twice lingered. I sped up, wanting to put some distance between myself and whoever was behind me, and that figure on the side of the road. The headlights behind me also accelerated, maintaining the same gap. My breath hitched. This wasn't right. Panic started to set in. 30 miles felt like an eternity. I needed to get rid of whoever was behind me, and fast. Up ahead, I saw a small, unpaved side road, barely more than a track leading into the trees. It was a risk, but staying on the main road felt like a bigger one. I yanked the wheel, the tires spitting gravel as I made a sharp turn. I drove a short way down the track, then killed the engine and the lights, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I held my breath, listening. The sound of an engine grew louder on the main road, then passed by. Through the trees, I saw the vehicle, a dark SUV, and in the brief flash of its taillights I could make out the silhouettes of multiple people inside. Not just one. My blood ran cold. After a few agonizing minutes, I cautiously backed out onto the main road. The SUV was long gone. I drove as fast as I dared, my eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, the low fuel light a persistent reminder of my vulnerability. Finally, the familiar glow of a gas station sign appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. I pulled up to the pumps, my hands still shaking slightly. The attendant, a grizzled man with tired eyes, barely looked up as I recounted my experience, omitting the low gas part out of embarrassment. "Yeah, we've had a few folks come in with similar stories lately," he said, nodding slowly. "Some say they saw the same guy more than once. Others, well, they don't stick around to talk about it." A chill crept down my spine. "Same hitchhiker?" I asked, my voice quieter than before. The man met my eyes, his expression unreadable. "If I were you, I'd keep driving and not think too hard on it." I filled my tank, paid quickly, and got back on the road. The image of the hitchhiker and the dark SUV burned into my memory. I made it to my destination later that night, physically unharmed but deeply shaken. The vast emptiness of the rural mountains, once a source of peaceful solitude, now carried a new, unsettling weight. I knew I wouldn't be forgetting that drive anytime soon. "Seriously, now?" My voice was tight with frustration, trying to keep the edge from my kids in the back seat. We were supposed to be halfway to our next stop by now, but instead, here we were. The minivan sputtering its last breaths on a dusty road just outside some town I couldn't even pronounce. It was Sunday evening, the kind of quiet where you could hear the crickets chirping a mile away, and of course, everything was closed. Sarah, my wife, consulted her phone, but the signal was weak. "Looks like this is Harmony Creek," she said with a sigh. "And yeah, everything's showing as closed on Sundays. Great, just great." After a bit of searching, I spotted a small lone auto shop a few blocks off the main road. The sign was faded Earl's Garage, but there were lights on inside. A sliver of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get back on the road tonight. Inside, the air smelled of oil and old rubber. A man in greasy overalls, who I assumed was Earl, looked up from under the hood of a beat-up pickup truck. He was a burly guy with a friendly enough smile. "Evening," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What can I do for you folks?" I explained our predicament, the sudden loss of power, the sputtering engine. He listened patiently, then nodded. "Sounds like it could be a few things. Let's take a look." He came out to the minivan, did a quick once-over, and then told me what I already suspected. It wasn't a quick fix. "But," he added, "I can probably get you back on the road tonight. Got a slow evening." Relief washed over Sarah and me. The kids were getting restless, and the thought of being stranded in this tiny town overnight wasn't appealing. Earl got to work, and we waited in the small, cluttered office. He seemed like a decent enough guy, making small talk, asking about our trip. Where were we headed? How long had we been on the road? Just casual conversation, or so I thought at first. But then the question started getting a little more specific. What was our final destination? Where were we planning on staying tonight? I answered vaguely, mentioning we had reservations further down the highway. Something about his probing felt a little off, a subtle discomfort settling in my gut. While he was supposedly working on the van, I noticed Earl kept glancing at his phone, which was sitting on a nearby workbench. He was texting someone repeatedly. The screen would light up, he'd type a quick message, then put it back down. It happened several times in a short period. His fingers moved quickly, like he was coordinating something urgent. Then, as he reached for a tool, his phone slid slightly, and I caught a brief glimpse of the screen. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "They'll be staying at," followed by what looked like a motel name. My blood ran cold. How did he know where we were staying? We hadn't told him that. I replayed the conversation in my head. Had I let something slip? No, I had been careful. So how did he know? Unless he had already assumed. Maybe he was fishing for confirmation, and I had given him just enough. My suspicion went from a nagging feeling to a full-blown alarm. The repair, which he initially said would be quick, was now dragging on. He kept disappearing into the back, and I could hear the occasional clang of tools, but it felt like it was taking an unusually long time for what seemed like a simple engine problem. I decided I needed to get us out of there. "Hey, Earl," I called out, trying to sound urgent. "Excuse me, but I just got a text. My brother-in-law. He's had a bit of an emergency. We might need to head back in the morning." I made it sound like a family crisis, hoping it would explain our sudden need to leave. He said he might even be able to drive out here tonight to pick us up. It was a complete lie, but I needed to see his reaction. Earl emerged from the garage, a wrench still in his hand. His friendly demeanor seemed to have shifted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Oh, that's too bad," he said, his voice a little flat. Then, surprisingly, he added, "Well, good news for you then. Looks like I just about got her running again." Just like that, after all this time? It felt too convenient. His expression was neutral, but something about his timing felt off. Had my lie forced his hand? Had we just dodged something? He presented me with a bill that was significantly higher than I'd expected for a Sunday evening repair in the middle of nowhere. I didn't argue. My priority was getting my family out of Harmony Creek. I paid the exorbitant amount, my eyes never leaving his. We piled back into the minivan, the engine thankfully sounding normal again. As we pulled out of Earl's garage, I checked the rearview mirror. A dark sedan was pulling out onto the road behind us, keeping a steady distance. My heart pounded. It was him, or someone connected to him. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I think we're being followed." She looked back, her eyes widening as she spotted the sedan. "What? Why?" "I don't know, but I don't like it. Stay calm, kids." I drove a few miles, and the sedan remained behind us. We were heading towards the interstate, and I knew we needed to get to a more public place. Up ahead, I saw a sign for a large highway rest stop, the kind with fast food restaurants and security cameras. "Okay," I said to Sarah. "When we get there, I'm pulling in. Stay alert." As we entered the busy rest stop, packed with travelers, I kept an eye on the sedan behind us. It slowed down as we turned into the parking lot. Then, to my relief, it continued straight on the highway, disappearing into the flow of traffic. We stayed at the rest stop for a while, letting the kids stretch their legs and trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. The next morning, as we were having breakfast at our hotel a couple of towns over, The local news was playing on the TV in the corner. The headline caught my eye. Overnight robbery at Willow Creek Motel. Willow Creek. That was the name I'd vaguely mentioned to Earl when he asked where we were staying. A chill ran down my spine. The news report detailed how several rooms had been broken into and valuables stolen. The thieves had known exactly which rooms to target. Sarah and I exchanged a horrified look. It was clear. Earl hadn't just been making friendly conversation. He'd been gathering information, and I had almost unknowingly given him the exact details he needed. We had narrowly escaped something much worse, all thanks to a gut feeling and a glimpse of a text message. The rest of our cross-country trip was spent with a heightened sense of awareness, a constant reminder of the unsettling encounter with the roadside mechanic in Harmony Creek. "Happy anniversary, babe," I said, reaching over to squeeze Sarah's hand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a perfect backdrop for our little getaway. We were a few hours into our drive, heading to a cozy cabin nestled in the state park, a surprise I'd been planning for months. Then we saw it, a bright orange road closed detour ahead sign. A little inconvenient, but nothing major. The detour directed us onto a smaller county road, which was still paved, but definitely less traveled. "Well, looks like we're taking the scenic route," Sarah said with a good-natured shrug. As we drove further, the roads became increasingly narrow and winding, the surrounding woods growing thicker and darker. The trees pressed in closer, their branches arching over the road like reaching fingers. The last streetlight had been miles ago, and now the darkness outside the headlights felt absolute. My phone's GPS, which had been reliable so far, started to get a little glitchy, the blue dot occasionally jumping off the road and into the trees. "Signal's getting weak out here," I muttered, trying to keep my eyes on the road and the map on my phone. That's when I noticed it. In my rearview mirror, the same pair of headlights had been there for a while now, ever since we took the detour. It was a dark sedan, keeping a consistent distance behind us. At first, I reasoned it was just someone else taking the same route, but as the miles stretched on, my unease grew. The sedan never got closer, never fell back, just lurked at the edge of my mirrors like a shadow. We came to an intersection where another detour sign should have been, but instead, we found it lying on the ground, knocked over. There were no other signs indicating which way to go. The whole scene felt wrong. "Great," Sarah sighed. "Now what?" I pulled over to the side of the road, putting the car in park. "Let me check the map again." As I fiddled with my phone, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dark sedan had also stopped, a good distance behind us. Then, two men got out of the car. They weren't dressed like locals heading home. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter and wiry. Their posture was too deliberate, their pace too measured. They started walking toward our car. A cold wave of dread washed over me. This didn't feel like coincidence. This felt like intent. "Sarah," I said quickly, my voice low and urgent, "something's wrong. We need to go." "What? What is it?" she asked, her eyes widening as she looked in the mirror. "Just trust me." I put the car in drive, ignoring the supposed detour route, and accelerated down the road to our right, the one that felt like it might eventually lead us back to the main highway. I watched in the rearview mirror as the two men stopped, looked at each other, then turned back to their car. They got in and their headlights flicked on, following us. My heart pounded in my chest. My gut was screaming at me this was a trap. The road we were on was rougher, unpaved in sections, but I kept my foot on the gas, pushing the minivan as fast as it would go. Gravel crunched under our tires as I pushed the van forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sedan's headlights flared in the mirror, inching closer. "Hold on," I told Sarah, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the familiar glow of highway lights in the distance. We burst onto the main road, merging into the traffic. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dark sedan was still there, a few cars back. "They're still following us," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I see them." I scanned the road ahead, looking for the first sign of civilization. Up ahead, I spotted a large, brightly lit gas station with several cars at the pumps and people milling around. "Okay, here's the plan. We're pulling in there. Stay close." I signaled and pulled into the crowded gas station. I parked near the entrance where there were plenty of people around. I watched the rearview mirror as the dark sedan approached. It slowed down as it passed the gas station, the driver glancing our way, then continued on down the highway without stopping. We stayed at the gas station for a while, both of us shaken. We called the non-emergency police line and reported the suspicious detour in the car that had been following us. The officer who took our report sounded concerned and said they'd send a patrol car to check out the area. The next day, we heard back from the police. They confirmed that several fake detour signs had been placed on that stretch of road, likely as a way to lure unsuspecting drivers to more isolated areas for robberies or worse. A shiver ran down my spine. Our anniversary trip had almost taken a very dangerous turn. We were incredibly lucky I'd trusted my instincts and gotten us out of there. As we sat in the quiet of our hotel room, Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. I keep thinking, what if we hadn't stopped at that gas station? I swallowed hard, squeezing her hand back. Let's not think about that. We're safe. That's what matters. The relaxing cabin in the woods suddenly seemed a lot less appealing, and we decided to head home, grateful to be safe. The open road had never felt so dangerous before, but now we would never look at a detour sign the same way again. The flight delay had been brutal, pushing my arrival in this small town well past 2 a.m. All I wanted was a bed and a few hours of sleep before my meeting in the morning. The GPS directed me to the only motel in sight that showed vacancy, the Pine Ridge Inn. It looked a little run down, the neon sign flickering intermittently, casting an eerie red glow onto the wet pavement. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the faint scent of rain and something stale. Old cigarettes, maybe. At this hour, I wasn't in a position to be picky. The night clerk, a gaunt guy with tired eyes, barely looked up as I approached the counter. After a mumbled greeting, he processed my check-in with an almost unsettling slowness. The faint hum of a vending machine filled the otherwise silent lobby. He hesitated a beat too long before sliding the keycard across the counter, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. "Just you tonight?" he asked, a strange, almost knowing smirk playing on his lips. Not many folks stay here alone this time of year. "Yeah, just me," I replied, grabbing my keycard, trying to ignore the prickle of unease his comment caused. He gave me a room at the very end of the property, furthest from the lobby and any other visible cars. Room 18. As I walked down the dimly lit corridor, the silence felt heavy, broken only by the squeak of my rolling suitcase and the occasional distant drip of water somewhere. The air smelled of damp carpet and cheap air freshener, the kind that never fully masks the underlying mildew. The room was basic, but clean enough. The faint buzz of the overhead light filled the space as I tossed my bag on the bed and started to unpack the essentials. As I was hanging up my suit jacket, I glanced out the window. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for my rental car and one other vehicle parked near the office. Then I saw him, the night clerk, walking slowly past my window. He didn't seem to be on any particular patrol, he just strolled by, his gaze flicking toward my room each time. A dull unease crept up my spine. He did this again a few minutes later. It was unnerving. Was he checking on me or something worse? A little while later, after I'd finally settled into bed, I heard a faint but distinct sound, someone testing my door handle. My blood ran cold. I lay there, frozen, my breath shallow. It didn't happen again immediately, but the feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. The air in the room suddenly felt too still, too heavy. I picked up the room phone and tried to call the front desk. It rang and rang, but no one answered. That was it. My unease had just ratcheted up to full-blown alarm. I got out of bed, my heartbeat thudding in my ears, and looked around for anything to use as a barricade. The only decent option was a heavy armchair by the small table. I dragged it over and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping it would provide at least a few seconds of resistance if someone tried to force their way in. Not long after, I heard hushed voices right outside my door. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, straining to make out what they were saying. "No one else checked in tonight," one voice whispered. Another deeper voice replied, "Should be easy, just like the last one." Then the first voice again, "Room at the end." My stomach twisted into a knot of icy fear. My skin prickled as a deep realization settled in. They were talking about me. This wasn't just paranoia, this was real. Panic surged through me, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted a friend back home, giving him my location and a brief rundown of the situation. His reply came almost instantly. "Make some noise, draw attention, let them know you're awake and aware." It was a good idea, a way to fight back without directly confronting them. I looked around the room for something I could use. My eyes landed on the TV remote. I grabbed it and cranked the volume up as loud as it would go, flipping through channels to make it sound like someone was actually watching. Then, I went around the room and turned on every single light, flooding the space with artificial brightness. I stood by the door, listening. For a moment there was silence. Then, I heard frustrated-sounding voices outside, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps moving away from my room, fading down the hallway. I stayed there, adrenaline coursing through me, not daring to relax. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the old building, every passing car sent a jolt of fear through me. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner became an irritating, constant presence. As soon as the first hint of dawn broke through the curtains, I was up and dressed. I moved the armchair away from the door, my ears straining for any sounds outside. The hallway was quiet. I quickly packed my bag and slipped out of the room, my eyes scanning the surroundings. The parking lot was still mostly empty, the air thick with early morning mist. I went straight to the front desk. The same night clerk was there, looking even more tired and somehow smug. A slow, almost knowing glance flickered across his face as I approached. I simply dropped my keycard on the counter without a word and walked out, not wanting to engage with him or give him any indication of how terrified I'd been. A few hours later, after I'd put a good 100 miles between myself and the Pine Ridge Inn, I stopped for coffee and checked the local news online. A headline screamed, "String of motel robberies plaguing county." My hands started to shake as I read the article. It detailed several recent incidents where solo travelers staying at smaller, isolated motels had been targeted in overnight robberies. The descriptions of the motels and the timing lined up perfectly with my experience. My stomach dropped. I could have been one of them. I immediately checked the locks on my car door, a wave of residual fear washing over me. I pulled over to the side of the road and found the local police department's non-emergency number. I anonymously reported my experience at the Pine Ridge Inn. detailing the clerk's unsettling behavior, the attempted door handle check, and the chilling conversation I'd overheard. I didn't give my name, but I hoped my information would help them catch whoever was responsible before someone else became a victim. The whole experience left me deeply shaken, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The thump-thump-thump started subtly, almost like a distant drumbeat, before escalating into a jarring vibration that rattled the entire SUV. I knew instantly what it was. Flat tire. Great. Just my luck on this stretch of highway that looked like it hadn't seen civilization since the Eisenhower administration. I pulled over as far as I could onto the dusty shoulder, the sun beating down mercilessly. First thing I did was check my phone. No surprise, 0 bars. Miles from anywhere, midday, and a flat. Terrific. I popped the trunk, wrestled out the spare and the jack, and started the familiar sweaty process of changing the tire. The heat was already getting to me, and the occasional 18-wheeler roaring past didn't make things any cooler. I was loosening the last lug nut when another vehicle finally stopped behind me. A beat-up sedan. A guy in a baseball cap and sunglasses got out, a friendly enough smile on his face. "Looks like you could use a hand," he called out. "Appreciate it," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "Just about got this last one." He came over and offered to help with the jack. He seemed genuinely helpful at first, making small talk about the weather and the road conditions. But then the questions started. Where was I headed? Such a long drive, must be going far. Was I on vacation? Traveling for work? The questions were innocent enough on the surface, but they kept coming, a little too personal for a roadside stranger. Then he said something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. "You must be carrying some pretty valuable stuff for a trip like this, huh?" He said it casually, almost like an observation, but the way he looked at my SUV, at my luggage visible through the back window, sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease creeping up my spine. "Nothing too fancy," I replied, forcing a smile. My voice felt tight, like I was trying to cover up the suspicion building inside me. As I finally got the flat tire off, I set the lug wrench down on the shoulder. The helper was standing a little too close, and as he shifted his weight, his foot accidentally nudged the wrench. It clattered down the slight embankment and disappeared into a shallow, weed-choked drainage ditch. "Oh, dang, sorry about that," he said, his smile still plastered on but not quite reaching his eyes. "Well, no worries. I've got a full set of tools in my car. Be right back." He turned and walked back to his sedan. I watched him in my side mirror. As he reached his trunk, he popped it open. Instead of immediately reaching for tools, I saw him put on a pair of gloves. Then he bent down and picked something up. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but the glint of metal caught the sunlight. A very bad feeling washed over me. This wasn't just a helpful stranger. This was something else. My mind raced. I had the spare on, but only finger-tight. It was incredibly unsafe to drive like that, but the alternative felt much worse. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed the partially secured tire, gave it a few quick pushes to make sure it was somewhat seated, and then tightened just one lug nut as tightly as I could with the stubby little wrench that came with the spare. Without another thought, I jumped into my SUV, started the engine, and threw it into drive. The vehicle lurched and wobbled precariously, but it moved. I pulled back onto the highway, ignoring the protests of the half-attached tire. I glanced in my rearview mirror. The helper was standing by his open trunk, watching me, his friendly facade completely gone. He quickly slammed the trunk shut, got into his car, and pulled out onto the highway following me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I couldn't outrun him in this condition for long. The car shook and bounced on the uneven tire, but I pushed on, hoping for a miracle. I scanned the horizon desperately, praying for any sign of civilization. Then, in the distance, I saw a cluster of big rigs, the gleaming chrome of a truck stop. It was a beacon in the desolate landscape. I floored the accelerator, the SUV shaking violently. As I got closer to the truck stop, I started flashing my lights and laying on the horn, hoping to draw attention. I swerved into the parking lot, pulling up haphazardly near a group of truckers who were standing outside their cabs, chatting. Several of them turned, looking surprised and then concerned as they saw my frantic arrival and the obviously loose tire. Just then, the sedan pulled into the truck stop entrance, slowing down as the truckers started to move towards my vehicle. The driver of the sedan hesitated for a moment, then slowly continued through the parking lot and back onto the highway without stopping. I quickly explained what had just happened, my voice still shaky with adrenaline. The truckers listened intently, their faces grim. One older guy, with a grizzled beard who said he used to be a mechanic, immediately got to work properly securing my spare tire. Another trucker mentioned hearing similar reports about suspicious roadside helpers on their CB radio network. They were a solid bunch. They insisted I stay for a while to calm down, offering me coffee and sharing their own stories from the road. One of them, who was heading in my general direction, even offered to escort me to the next major town. I gratefully accepted their offer. Driving alongside his massive rig for the next hour gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt since the flat tire. Once I reached a larger town, I thanked the truckers profusely for their help and promised to pay it forward. My first stop was the Highway Patrol office, where I recounted the entire unsettling incident, hoping they could prevent someone else from falling into the same potential trap. The anniversary trip was definitely memorable, but for all the wrong reasons.